So we'll move on to the preliminary budget. I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Salem. I presented the preliminary budget for fiscal year 2015 at the Finance Committee meeting, Special Finance Committee meeting a week ago today. And the Finance Committee asked that I do a brief presentation, and I will indeed do a brief presentation. So if you will turn and look at the screen. So looking at the revenues for the budget, and again, this is the preliminary budget, so this is a rough draft. In my days of teaching English, this is a very rough draft of the budget, and we will be bringing the tentative budget that'll be tightened up, that'll be as close as we can get it to what we think is going to happen next year in terms of revenues and expenditures. We'll be bringing that August 19th, and there's some additional work that the Finance Committee has asked me to do, and the Business Office to do, that the committee members may talk about as well. But first of all, on the revenue side, we're looking at $61.6 million in total revenues, $47.5 million in the education fund, over $8 million in operations and maintenance, $1.5 transportation, $2 million in IRS Social Security, $267,000 capital projects, $1,000 in bond interest, $992, just under $1 million in tort, life safety, and then working cash. So for a total of $61,698. And then true to form, like we've seen in previous years, 90% of our revenues come from property taxes and other local sources. We get just a small amount from the state, $3.8 million, and a small amount from the federal government, $2.1 million, and that's primarily the IDEA grant and the Title I grant, a few other small grants as well. And if you like to see things in a pie chart, that's how it looks graphically, and no surprise, the blue and the gold is the property taxes and the other local sources, and then the pie gets smaller if you go to the state and then the federal sources. So comparing this to the amended budget that the board approved a few months ago, we're looking at about 23% decrease in property taxes, from $63 million to $48 million. Just a slight decrease in other local revenue, a slight increase in state revenue, and then a slight decrease in federal revenue for an aggregate change of about 19% of a decrease. And for now, we are assuming that we're getting the full receipt of what we are supposed to get as far as allocations from the TIF districts. We have not made any adjustments yet to that, but right now we're assuming we're getting the full allocation. So the next question is, okay, so you saw about a $14.5 million difference in property taxes, and you're probably thinking to yourself, as I was when I was putting this together, why are property tax revenues in the preliminary budget down $14.5 million when the board reduced the levy by $10 million back in December? Well, great question. There's 5 reasons for that. First of all, in Illinois, in many counties, the tax levy overlaps in the 2 fiscal years. Second of all, Cook County, and I tried to word this very appropriately, utilizes an unequal tax billing system that can provide unusual year-over-year fluctuations. The third bullet then, because the final EAV and tax rates aren't known in the spring, the time we do the first installment, or we receive the first installment, they take an estimate based on the prior year's levy. So the amount of money we just got in the spring was actually an estimate of not the levy we just did in December of 2013, but the year before that, December of 2012. And then the second installment, which we'll get in September, in the fall, that's when they know the actual EAV, the CPI, and new construction, and if there's any referenda, they adjust for that. And then the final note is when there's abnormal changes in the levy, whether it's debt service, referendum, or like we did, an intentional reduction in the levy, it will cause multiple year impacts, and that's not by anyone's fault. That's just the way Cook County allocates property taxes. So that's kind of the philosophy behind it and the reasons why. Now putting the actual numbers to putting the pen to the paper and putting it down here, how do we arrive at that $48.6 million in property tax revenues? Well, what you got to do is you got to start with last year's collection, the spring 2014 collection. And the 2014 collection in the spring, which is actually counted in the FY14 budget, it's not in the new FY15 budget, was approximately 55% of the prior year's of 2012 levy. Again, that's the way Cook County estimates the levy extension. So that amount is $33.7 million. Then, the first installment that we'll get in the new budget, the FY15 budget, is actually the first part of the 2013 levy, the levy we just approved and adopted in December. So, the levy that we approved in December was about $10 million less, $53.8 million. We just received 33.7 in the spring, so you subtract it out, and that's what we're going to get in the fall, just over 20 million. The second part of that, the cycle just repeats itself again. So in the spring of 2015, which, March, April, which will be our second installment for the FY15 budget, that's going to be a 55% estimate of the levy that we just approved in December of 2013. So we're always kind of a year behind. So 53.8 times the 53, we take a couple percent out for the uncollectible portion, and we get the $28.5 million. So you add the two numbers, the 20 million and the 28 million, 0.5, you came up with 48.6, 48,622,157 in property tax receipts for the FY15 budget. That's the same levy collection model that PMA uses, so we're matching up and we're in sync with everything that we're getting because they use that levy model and it feeds right into our projection model, our 5-year projection model. So it all syncs up. I'll answer any questions at the end. Let me just zip through this here. The other side of the books, the expenditures, we're looking at $57.8 million in the education fund, just over $6 million in the operations and maintenance fund, 1.8 in transportation, 2.4 million in the IRS Social Security fund, 5.6 in capital projects, 2.4 million in bond and interest, 980,000 in tort. Right now, nothing in life safety that's planned, but we want to have some money in there in the fund balance in case we have any emergency expenditures, and then working cash. So $77.2 million. On the expenditure side, if you like seeing it as a pie graph or a pie chart, there it is. The biggest, of course, is our education fund and then the operations and maintenance fund. And then I break it down by function: general instruction, special education, vocational, interscholastic, summer school, driver ed, other instructional support services for pupil support services, administrative, instruction, and debt service. So there's another way of looking at it, $77.2 million. And then I do a comparison of the preliminary budget versus last year's amended budget, and you'll see that general instruction is up about $3 million, and other instructional is up $1.3 million, and you'll see two decreases. Construction is down $1.9 million, and debt service is down $5.5 because we paid off our debt certificates last year, and we won't have that expenditure in this year's budget. So overall, expenditures are looking at a total decrease in the aggregate, all funds, of a 3.3% decrease. General instruction is up $3 million. A portion of that is for the additional FTE that was approved due to sectioning and increased enrollment. Also due to some of the things we're doing in technology with the one-to-one initiative, the park testing, and some of the new wireless access points that we're looking at. And then in other instructional, that $1.3 million is up basically due to private facility tuition for special education. That's been something that the Finance Committee has asked me to dig deeper into, and I'll be providing data for them prior to the August 19th Finance Committee, so we can deeper there. So the bottom line, very quickly here, we're looking at $61.6 million in revenue, 77.2 in expenditures. We've got the sources of and uses fund, where we do some fund transfers at $7.8 million. I'll explain those in a second. So we're going to be decreasing our fund balance by about $15.5 million. We're looking like July 1 unaudited fund balance of $127 million, and everything plays out exactly as it looks on this page. We'll be looking at $111.5 million at the end at this time next year. And very quickly, we'll be transferring $5.3 million from operations and maintenance to capital projects for our construction, and we'll be transferring $2.5 million from working cash to bond interest for the abatement that the board approved for the bond interest levy back in December. So the next steps, I've kind of been putting some check marks there next to the side. I presented this to the Finance Committee June 19th, presenting it to the full board tonight. I'll present now the tentative budget August 19th to the Finance Committee meeting. That very same night, we're going to have a special board meeting to adopt a resolution to place the budget on display and set the date of the public hearing, because if we waited till August 28th, it wouldn't give us the required 30 days by law. So we need to do it August 19th. September 23rd, we'll have the public hearing, and I'll make a recommendation that the board adopt the final FY15 budget. And then, of course, 30 days after that, I've got to post it on the website, file it with the county clerk, the state, and the regional office. So that is a quick, did it in 14 minutes, overview of the preliminary budget. And I believe I kept it brief like the Finance Committee asked me to.